Welcome to another edition of Comprehensive Yoga Therapy Graduates on the Move. We have today special guest Djuan Short. She is from Maryland, outside of Washington, D.C. And Djuan had taken to yoga at a younger age, and she'll tell us about that in a minute. And then came back to yoga and so forth. She did her undergraduate in Maryland, and then she went further into a master's of social work at the University of Pennsylvania. And that brings her to where she lives now in the Philadelphia area. Obviously, you can see her wonderful practice there. So good morning, Djuan.
Good morning, Bob. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So we've known each other for roughly 5 or 6 years.
It's been a long time.
I know it seems, yeah, I guess that's a long time actually, because she's been with us, she trained with us for 4 years and is doing a great job now. So, Djuan.
Yes.
How did you kind of meet yoga? I've heard the story in brief, but I'd love to hear it again.
Yeah, so I came in contact with yoga. So there was a show on, I forget what channel it was on, but it was called Girlfriends. And Girlfriends was written by Mara Brock-Akil, and she's also the same person who helped to write Being Mary Jane. And I remember watching these 4 Black women go into these yoga studios, and they were like the only Black women in the yoga studio during that time. And this must have been like in the 2000s. But I just remember being like, oh, like, I wonder what that's about. And it wasn't until a few years later when I went to college where, the University of Maryland, College Park, it is a predominantly white institution, but they had at that time a high percentage of students who were coming in that were of color. And so I thought, I'm going to go to the yoga studio that's on campus, like really right next door to like where my dorm room was. And I remember being in there being like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm looking at everyone and they're just flowing through these poses. And I was just like, I don't think I belong here. And that must have been in like my freshman year of college. After that one class, I never went back. And it wasn't until literally 4 years later, I moved to Philadelphia and I went with some friends to a hot yoga studio. And I was like, all right, I was still like one in the room, but I felt like I'm in here and it's going to be all right. Because I think by that time I'd matured enough to understand that, it wasn't about the space as a whole. It was about me and my comfort level. And, through the years, even in our yoga program that I did with you, Bob, it wasn't many students of color, but it also wasn't many students who looked like me. So I think, that was just a journey that I had to go on and really just recognize like the yoga for me is what became more important and just the connections with the people.
The connections with the people and yoga. All right. Let me ask your advice. So what would you say to college-age Djuan who went into a yoga class that wasn't probably the right class for her? Because some of the times somebody's new to yoga and they jump into a class that's actually not for beginners.
Yeah.
Right? Because they were probably going real fast and doing this whole sequence. It'd be like going into a dance class where everybody knew the dance.
Right.
And you just walked in there. What would you say to people to your old self?
I would say, knowing what I know now, I would have said to her, stay until the end of the class. And just as well as you were able to talk to your teachers in high school and your professors, make sure that you talk to the instructor and let them know kind of where you're coming from and that it's okay that you didn't know, but you want to get a chance, like you want to learn. I think I would have told myself that. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. And then even just generally speaking, yeah, the person wants to find, there's different types of yoga classes. So when you started to connect with it while you were in grad school, you went with some friends, did you?
Yeah.
So that's always nice because then you have people to talk to and, because anybody sometimes when they walk into yoga studios, they get feel like everybody else knows each other and you walk in as a new person, it's kind of awkward. So what were your personal benefits from those classes in the beginning,
Mm.
would you say?
If I'm being honest, I think back then, because I was going to the hot yoga classes, at that time, it was just more about like going and like stretching and doing something that was a bit more novel. I don't think I had any attachment to it in the way that I do now. And I've grown, in that space. And then there was another studio that I would go to, but again, it was just something that I did. It wasn't there wasn't
Right.
any,
More physical,
yeah.
more physical, a little bit of a workout. So what was then the shift that your yoga, you enjoyed it and then there's obviously some pivotal shift where it went to an internal experience.
I got in a car accident in 2015. Someone had rear-ended me. And I started seeing a medical massage therapist whom I love. And I was also seeing a chiropractor at that time. And I found this woman on YouTube called Leslie Fightmaster. She's now deceased. But I loved her videos. And so I'd be in my apartment, doing some of the stretches. And I would go and I would tell my masseuse, I'm like, hey, I'm doing this. And she's like, okay, well, you're getting better. And it made me realize that one, my body can take care of itself if I help it to take care of itself. And then two, I liked the experience that I was building in the house. Like I was starting to develop a home routine. And it was one of those things that I started latching on to as an anchor when like life was getting hectic or even when life was moving easily along. It was just starting to become more of a part of my life.
So it's an anchor. That's a pretty powerful image. I kind of think of grounding and I'm going to guess the yoga that you were watching with this nice teacher, she was older, was she? No?
Probably maybe about 10 to 15 years older than me. So if I'm 32.
Oh, okay. She was not. Okay. I thought you said she's not doing it anymore or something.
No, she passed away.
Yeah. So was she doing more gentle yoga for
More of
rehab or something? Oh, really? Still okay.
There was a lot of it.
But you were starting to feel mental benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yes. I was feeling mental benefits, emotional benefits, and I was just also having a very different experience of learning to understand my body at that time.
Interesting. So at home, you were able to focus more on yourself. Maybe in the other situations, there was a social component.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. And then what led you to becoming to getting interested in teaching of yoga?
Well, that wasn't my initial plan. My initial plan, when I reached out, my initial plan was to join the yoga therapy program. And I remember being on the phone with you and you were like, yeah, you could, but we like for people to kind of get the fundamentals. And I was just like, I mean, okay. Cause in my mind at that time, I was already doing like a trauma program. And I was also working on getting a certificate as a EMDR certified therapist, which is another like, very trauma focused training. And I was just like, okay, well, I got to do this to get to where I got to go, then like, let me just go through it. And, that time period was like just very pivotal in my life. Like, I think when I initially called you, I was ready, but I wasn't ready, had life happen. And then it was like, let me come back. All right, I'm ready. And I think it was what I needed at that time, because when I came into YogaLife, I think a lot of what we were doing was complementing everything that I was learning around the healing of trauma in the body. I think, my earlier relationship was more about just getting acquainted and developing in a relationship and using it as an anchor. Whereas by the time I came to YogaLife, it was, this is what you're using to help heal you from the inside out, if that makes sense.
It does. So how could, so see, we say the word yoga and then there's all these different levels to it or all these different depths.
Yeah.
So, exercise, right? Getting in touch with your body, as you said, and you had the accident and then all that. And now you just said inside out. So you see how we're moving from the outside to the inside. So why don't you tell us, like, how would somebody just start there instead of waiting so long to get to this inside? What is the inside? What brought you there?
I think the inside is being open. One of the things that I've learned over the last few years is, a lot of people are consistently seeking to have reassurance, to feel open, and to go into experiences that feel open in terms of that welcoming feeling coming back at you. And we want support and we want to be encouraged. And sometimes it's very hard for people to say that they want those things and they want to have those experiences. And so by the time I got to YogaLife, I was open in the space of being able to receive those things and allowing myself to get to those levels of it happening in my external world and it not just being me pouring into myself. And I think that throughout my process with, my relationship with yoga, the early phases was me learning how to use it for myself, and then coming into new spaces was allowing other people to give it to me and being open to it. So I think for someone else, you would kind of start in that same space of, are you looking for reassurance? Are you wanting to be open? Do you want to be supported? And do you want to be encouraged? And if the answer is yes, then you have to kind of walk into it understanding that there's no right or wrong in this experience. You just get you can be here, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And so I know that, so when you go to a yoga class, there's a certain limited amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
Then you jump into something like a yoga teacher's training program, and we'll get into the yoga therapy shortly.
Yeah.
But you start learning some theory. You start learning about how yoga looks at the mind, mm-hmm. how it looks at psychology, how it looks at nutrition, all these different things. So I'm going to gather that having those things be expressed clearly started to help you with the internal process.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. I mean, but I was already doing a lot of that work outside of yoga too. So so for me, it was my life was starting to transition in a way where not only was I developing skills that I now use in my practice around trauma, healing, and what does it look like energetically, but I was also going through my own experience of working those things out. And I think everything happening at the same time, I was more open to receiving the process because everything was moving.
Right. So what you mean is when you went through your psychology studies on all those different areas, all those inputs, that they put you through it too.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were giving you some additional theory along with somatic understanding that was causing your own personal healing and growth to really catapult. But you were primed for it because you went to psychology, you went to a graduate degree in psychology.
Right. And I had already started doing things like yoga. So for me, at that time, I think I had also started dancing, going to Afrobeats types of classes, where you do a more African dance. I started doing that, and I was going to yoga. And for me, dancing, and people would say yoga is a form of dancing, based on how you move and how slow you move with the music. But dancing that was something else that I was doing. So again, dancing is big. It could be closed. It was a lot of those two things happening at the same time that provided me a lot of just it was like healing feedback, in that frequency coming back at me. Yeah. Nice.
And so then I think when you did get to your yoga therapy phase, after kind of getting into understanding more about basic yoga practices and the basic theory, meditation, again, how we're looking at the mind, Then when you started doing this yoga therapy process, which was a couple of years process, so the teacher's training at the time was 1 year, and then the yoga therapy was 3. Our program is now 2 year straight through with no summer vacations. But when you did it, it was 3 years. So this woman was with us for 4 years, as were many people and the other people who we interviewed too. So when you got into the yoga therapy, I remember a few things along your journey, but what was that process like for you?
So we started off being in person. And while I know that you can build community, on the internet, I'm on the internet, like that's how I do my business. I think that there was something different about being in the room. And, for 1 week in a month, everyone would clear their schedules to be at YogaLife all day long, right? And it's almost like, those intentional communities is kind of like what that makes me think about, because we would be there we're having breakfast, we're having lunch, we're having dinner, we're having breaks, going for walks, all those different things. So the people that I came in with that year, I think especially those of us who had did teacher training 1 together, we kind of already had like connection and community, but it wasn't one of those things where other people couldn't come in and join as well.
Right.
I think that was really beneficial. And then going into, the pandemic happened and watching the shift and the transition, I think it was hard for a lot of people to be online for a long time. But in saying all that, I think what also came out of those 3 years was really just understanding how everything is cyclical. And so I think for anyone who's thinking about yoga teacher or yoga therapy, and you would have to think about it almost as like you're going to talk about, let's say we're going to talk about fear. Fear is going to come up in one element, but then it's going to come up in another element, maybe a little bit down the line, and just understanding that everything is cyclical. And what you're really doing is learning how to like wash away the parts that aren't applicable at this point in time. And I think that was something I didn't realize until after the program was based on how we were being taught.
That we cycled through different ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, people have said to me in the past, "Are we repeating material?" And in some cases, I said yes, on purpose, because when you see something at one stage and then you see it at another stage, you experience the thing differently, and then you allow some depth, and then you realize for your whole life that you said fear, you can work on that your whole life. You can work on anything your whole life. So one of the big things I remember so Djuan, she's in her private practice now, but she transitioned into that during her training with us.
Yeah.
And as many psychotherapists, their practices grow when they start doing the yoga therapy. But I remember you telling me a little bit about some of the students you worked with when you were in the school system as a psychologist, and how you started being more just as a presence as opposed to a problem solver.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How did yoga help you move into that?
Well,
it almost felt like you became more powerful with your presence alone.
I think
you told me about that, I think, a while back.
Yeah, I think by that time, I had already been in the school for maybe like 2 years, 3 years at that point. So the program that I was running was a pillar in the community, in the school community at that point. And we had already started the process of providing yoga classes to the students. And we were getting a lot of the students that were considered, emotional support, or the kids who had emotional disturbances and things of that nature. So we were getting kind of like the very, quote unquote, rough children. But when they would come into our spaces, they were able to relax. They were able to try some of the postures. And sometimes some of them just fell asleep during the entire time. But for me, that was still doing yoga, because in a lot of ways, a lot of those children, they don't get to rest, and they don't get to allow their minds and their bodies to both relax at the same time, right? Like one is always running. The kids, they would put up their cell phones for at least 45 minutes. They would give up their lunch to come in, so I think that was the yoga happening in a space where things are typically punitive, especially in an urban high school. So yeah, by that time that I left there, it was sad because nobody else was slated to pick it up. But I do know for the kids that did participate that they did get a lot from it.
Nice. So you were essentially showing them how to anchor themselves the way you anchored yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then because you've done this, you understand that a person has to experience it just the way you described, versus a teacher pushing it. You can't push somebody into relaxing or getting in touch with themselves. Mm-hmm. So very nice. So I would think a normal question for somebody who's not a psychotherapist, they would say, why would somebody who has all this training like you do, why would they go into yoga therapy if they're already a counselor and they're already a yoga teacher? Like when you have, if like I could understand they need to be a yoga teacher, but then, so there's often a misunderstanding here. Maybe you can elaborate because they think, oh, I teach yoga, I can just use it. What would be the distinction for what you gained from yoga therapy?
So I think about this often. What I will say, so this is me saying this as someone who, I have the clinical degrees, but I also have the yoga experience. One of the big things that I think came out of the yoga therapy program was I think I really understood what education, philosophy, and practice means. Whereas in our clinical space, we're looking at, what's being presented in front of us, and you use that information to kind of check in the boxes and fill out categories as to like what's happening with the person. Whereas what we did in yoga therapy, it allows you to look a lot deeper into specific issues. And so one of the things my clients always say, how do you even know that was how I was feeling? And I'm like, because I'm always looking at what you're not saying. I'm looking at what is your body language saying and what is the connection that is trying to show me and what is trying to help me to understand about you. Or, even helping them to understand how they may be holding things like stress in their body, things like fear and anxiety in their body and how it manifests itself. And when you add in the yoga therapy component, nowadays we call it the woo-woos, the good jujus and all those things. But I think yoga therapy helped to provide the evidence and the spiritual component to what was already being done in the clinical space. It was the nice merger, at least for me, of East meets West. And it really allowed, I forget what the name of the little medical statue is, but it really helped me to understand what Western medicine and Western ways of doing things is trying to say. But when you add in the Eastern perspective, you're really allowing the healing to take place for your client. So that was the big thing for me. I hope that answered your question.
It does.
Okay.
So we're kind of moved the conversation to the final phase of, you kind of moved us right into it. How you're using yoga therapy now, what's your future? But when you talk about the energy moving up, like even if you take the snake images away and you just have the energy of transformation spiraling, I think part of what you said there is allowing, not fixing, not answering a person's questions and telling them what they should be doing or how they should be this, or you're probably holding a presence, and then the person in your presence starts to explore things that they may not have considered. When you say, hey, I notice your shoulders are like this, you don't tell them what that is. You ask them, what is that? And then they're suddenly like, hey, yeah, that's true, and then they have their insights. Yeah. But I think the key that you're mentioning is that you're allowing that to occur and you're saying you're bringing them out. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in a way, like you said, in Western psychology, it's a little more measured and it's a little more, which box do you fit in? Mm-hmm. You're showing symptoms of this, therefore we treat it like that. as opposed to being slightly more organic and then letting things come out.
Right.
Is that, yeah.
100%.
And then we use all this yoga philosophy that helps us, like the chakras or the different layers of a person and all these different things that help. So as you go forward, where are you heading with your yoga therapy and your private practice?
So where you can look for me for next year. Next year, actually, I'm all about a few things. So the first thing is building out. So my grand thought is building out a landing platform where it's hosting kind of like those opportunities for individuals who may not be able to afford, like therapy, or they may not be able to afford, a extensive yoga therapy package, but maybe they want smaller things. Building out something of a platform for them, so that way those individuals can still be able to receive the resources and support that they need, but also at their own pace. Because one of the other things that I realized over my years of doing this work is that you may be ready for the person to move along, and the person may not necessarily be ready, but it's important for you to help them lay the groundwork, so that way when they are ready, they're willing to take the next step. And I say that as someone who now, when I get clients, I can automatically tell you, like, this is the issue, da 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 da. And then I have to remind myself that they're not there in that stage of growth. So while I can see it, I'm going to have to walk them through the step, and maybe it's a little quicker for me to move, but it may not be quicker for them to move. So that's one thing that I want to make sure that as I'm building out this platform, that's getting infused. The second thing is finding more ways to connect with people using yoga and using yoga therapy. So you'd love this. My accountant was like, so when are we going to get some yoga classes or yoga seminars? Or do you do that? And I was like, technically I do. So she was like, yeah, we need to see more of that for next year. So I was like, I think I can make that work. We'll figure it out. And then lastly, I am looking.
Hold on a sec. What kind of seminars should we be looking for?
One's around anxiety and stress. I have a lot of clients who deal with anxiety, and for me, anxiety looks very different for every individual, but teaching them specific skills around how to use visualizations and mantras and affirmations and breathing to work through the anxiety, but then to also help the body understand where the anxiety may be sitting and how to move the energy. So that's like something that's like sitting in my mind.
Nice. Very nice.
Opportunity. But yeah, so around anxiety and stress, and specifically for, women who are in corporate America, I think that that's kind of where you see a lot of that, especially women in tech and healthcare. Yeah. Those are the big two areas. So yeah, I think that that's really what's next for me. And then just still growing my skill sets. Have a few conferences coming up next year that I'll be attending. I have a few yoga books that I have to sink my teeth into. But yeah, that's my plan.
Sounds good. Wonderful. Do you want to add anything? I know we talked a lot here.
This was fun. And
do you want to say a little more about the issue of women of color doing yoga?
Oh, sure.
Because I think you went to an amazing conference that was really helpful.
Yes. So there's a group called the Black Yoga Teacher Alliance. And so they have a Facebook group, and anyone who's a Black yoga teacher, they can join, or anyone who considers themselves to be like a Black yogi, or a person of color yogi, like, more than welcome to join those group. But what Bob is talking about, so they had an event at Kaparlu, which is up in Massachusetts. I forget where Massachusetts.
Massachusetts, yep.
And I went, and it was so nice, to meet Black women, because that was who was mostly there, Black women and Black men who had been practicing yoga for 40 years and 50 years, and they were in their 70s and they were still doing splits. And, they were talking about, how a lot of them were Bikram yoga students over the years, and they've evolved into different things. There was a few women who did yoga therapy and got like certified. But it was really nice to see just a community of people that I would have never really known existed until one day I just happened to be on Kapalu's website, and that's how I kind of got introduced. But it was just very nice to see that and to know that this had been a practice and a group of people who have been trying to build more community for a long time. And I was like, I felt seen in that moment. I think
Nice.
that also helped to reaffirm me showing up in the spaces that I was occupying at that time.
Nice. Well, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So, Djuan, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. And I hope people feel like they got to know you a little bit. Obviously, we love you a lot. We're so happy for all the things that are happening and unfolding. And all right. Thank you very much.